Crime Story.
Jolly Jane Toppan is a nurse and a serial killer. From a young age, we are instilled with a deep trust in medical professionals. The mere notion that a medical expert, someone entrusted with preserving our lives, could instead turn towards malevolence strikes a unique chord of fear within us. When murder is committed solely for the sake of pleasure, as Jane Toppan did, the horror of the situation becomes palpable for anyone. The early life. At birth, this woman was named Honora, entering the world in Boston in 1854 as the offspring of Irish immigrants, Peter and Bridget Kelly. Nora, as her parents were known, was the youngest of 3 daughters, with Delia being her 2-year senior and Nellie 6 years older. Bridget, Nora's mother, succumbed to tuberculosis when Nora was not even 3 years old. This left Peter to raise the children on his own, struggling with alcoholism and seemingly grappling with some form of mental illness. Peter earned himself the moniker Kelly the Crack, suggesting a fractured state of mind. The daughters endured a profoundly unhappy childhood, and by 1860, they were removed from Peter Kelly's household and placed in the Boston Women's Asylum. By then, their older sister, Nellie, had grown old enough to carve her own path, although it was evident to all that she, like her father, grappled with mental illness. Nellie ultimately found herself in a mental institution. Urban legend has it that, as Peter neared the end of his life, he experienced a psychotic break and attempted to sew his eyelids shut. But the actual fate of this troubled man remains shrouded in mystery. In 1860, the Boston Female Asylum was home to approximately 100 girls, who stayed there until they reached the age of 10 or until they were adopted. Nora, however, departed from the asylum in 1862 at the tender age of 8, not as a daughter but as a servant, finding herself in the household of a stern and self-absorbed woman named Jane Toppan. The Servant's Tale. Even in such circumstances, Nora, when compared to the fate of other girls who remained unadopted, could be deemed fortunate. Jane Toppan harbored a deep disliking for the Irish and sought to impart this sentiment to Nora by bestowing upon her a new American identity, Jane, along with the Toppan family name. Jane grew up alongside Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, though she was never permitted to forget her true status. Astonishingly, she was never formally adopted by the Toppan family, although Elizabeth appeared to treat her with kindness. In the midst of her domestic chores, Jane attended school, where she was an unpopular figure. Despite her vivid imagination and storytelling abilities, she employed her talents for less virtuous purposes, crafting and disseminating rumors and defaming others. Her vindictive nature meant that she failed to establish a single friendship during her time at school. Upon reaching her 18th birthday, Jane finally gained her freedom, yet she continued to serve the Toppans for over a decade. Anne's passing occurred in the 1870s, and a few years later, Elizabeth married a deacon named Oriel Brigham. Career choice. Jane was once engaged, but her fiancé left her for another woman. Undeterred, she continued to toil for her half-sister until 1885, when she finally resolved to embark on her own path. During those times, opportunities for women in the workforce were limited, mostly confined to menial labor. Jane, however, had grand aspirations, opting for a more challenging route. In 1887, at the age of 33, she boldly applied and was accepted into the nursing school at Cambridge Hospital in Boston. In her previous life, Jane had been known as a purveyor of gossip and deceit, a reputation that left her bereft of genuine friendships. Nursing school granted her a fresh start, and she made the most of it. Her performance was so impressive that she swiftly earned the moniker Jolly Jane. Nonetheless, she preferred to go by Jenny, as that was the name most people used for her. Life as a trainee nurse was demanding. She toiled 7 days a week for 12 hours at a stretch and had a mere 2 weeks of respite annually. Although her path was arduous compared to her prior life as a domestic worker, it was undeniably more engrossing. Jane faced all the rigors of her training without a single complaint. Her exceptional fortitude and affable disposition endeared her to her fellow students, and she cultivated true friendships. Of course, her penchant for spreading gossip and ingratiating herself with authority figures persisted, albeit with more caution. Only 2 known incidents marred her record. In one, she propagated a rumor that led to the expulsion of a girl who had crossed her, and she perpetually faced suspicions of petty theft, yet her accusers could never catch her red-handed. Work as a student nurse. From almost the very first month of her medical training, students at this particular school began their practical work with patients. Jenny, known for her radiant and affable manner of interaction, found success in dealing with patients. She held a peculiar fondness for them, albeit in an entirely unexpected fashion. Subsequent investigations uncovered that she intentionally manipulated records to extend the hospital stays of those patients she had particularly warmed to. In certain instances, it appeared she might have deliberately administered incorrect medications that could have compromised their well-being. Nonetheless, Mary Jenny's devious activities escaped all suspicion. The only aspect that gave a hint of disquiet was her treatment of elderly patients under her care. She would often jest that it was futile to let them linger. At the time, people merely regarded it as humor. Little did they know she wasn't joking in the slightest. According to Jenny's own accounts, she ended the lives of at least 10 individuals during her tenure as a student nurse. She possessed a fervor for pharmacology and a deep understanding of drugs, which facilitated her emergence as a remarkably effective poisoner. In this clandestine role, Toppan administered potent substances to her patients, keen to witness firsthand the effects of her medicine. Soon, she derived a twisted pleasure from observing her patients suffering. Her ecstasy reached its pinnacle when she witnessed a man's life extinguish before her eyes for the first time. As time went on, the tranquil and serene demises no longer sufficed to satisfy her cravings, leading Jane to alter her methodology, concocting drug combinations that induced severe convulsions and agonizing pain in her unsuspecting victims. With remarkable precision, she administered substances that masked the patient's symptoms, confounding even seasoned physicians who, perplexed by their patients' conditions, were left utterly bewildered. The use of plant-based poisons by Toppan further aided in concealing any signs of poisoning. By the conclusion of her apprenticeship, she had honed her craft to such a degree that she could skillfully bring patients to the precipice of death, only to subsequently restore them to health, congratulating them on their miraculous recovery. Hospital work. Upon completing her training, Jenny had established a respectable enough reputation to secure a position at the esteemed Massachusetts General Hospital. Here, she faced the challenge of demonstrating her skills and earning the coveted nursing license. Initially, her performance was commendable, and the possibility of career advancement appeared promising. Nevertheless, this was no longer the environment of a medical school hospital. It was staffed with more vigilant professionals. Consequently, Jenny soon acquired a reputation for appropriating the credit due to others. Her erroneous patient assignments began to come to light, though these were attributed to her haste and excessive enthusiasm rather than malice. No one suspected that she was clandestinely subjecting patients to torment and death through her chemical concoctions. One survivor, Amelia Finney, later recounted the unsettling tale of Jenny joining her bedside while she convulsed on the brink of death. Toppan comforted her, tenderly stroking and kissing her face, assuring her that everything would be all right soon. Before Jenny could administer the fatal dose to Amelia, she was startled by another nurse and had to depart. The following morning, Mrs. Finney dismissed the experience as a fevered dream. Only years later, when Jane's malevolence was exposed, did she realize it had been a horrifying reality. In 1890, Jenny's tenure at Massachusetts General Hospital came to a close. Her colleagues described her as a contentious figure. Doctors admired her for her competence, but the nurses held her in disdain. This was in no small part due to suspicions surrounding Jane, who was believed to be involved in various minor transgressions, such as theft of money and a patient's diamond ring. Her downfall came when she committed the grave error of leaving the ward without securing the doctor's permission, leading to her immediate dismissal. Consequently, despite successfully passing her final examination and being awarded her diploma, Toppan was thwarted in her pursuit of the nursing license she had yearned for so long. In the ensuing months, Jenny found work as a private nurse. However, she later embarked on a cross-country journey back to Cambridge Hospital in an attempt to obtain her license there. Her dark tendencies nearly caught up with her when a doctor observed her in the act of attempting to poison a trainee nurse named Maddie Davis. Jane adeptly talked her way out of the situation, attributing it to a momentary lapse of attention. Another doctor noticed an unusual frequency of fatalities among convalescent patients under Jenny's care. Nevertheless, no one harbored serious suspicions, deeming it a mere coincidence. Despite this, these details were sufficient for the aforementioned doctors to report them to the hospital board. And Jenny and the hospital mutually agreed to part ways. Once more, she found herself unsuccessful in her quest to obtain a nursing license. Private nurse. With the hospital path closed to her, Jenny opted to embark on a career in private practice. This transition proved financially lucrative, as private nurses commanded nearly twice the pay. However, it came at the cost of a stable environment. The autonomy she enjoyed in her new role, unburdened by the stringent oversight of the hospital, was a definite advantage. Yet the downside was the absence of a consistent supply of potential victims. Nevertheless, over the ensuing 8 years, Jane Toppan successfully carved out a niche as the most accomplished private nurse in Boston. Amid her professional life, she still found time to satiate her murderous desires. In 1895, residing on Wendell Street in Cambridge, Jenny rented a room from an elderly couple, Israel and Lavi Dunham. She perceived Israel as having aged excessively, becoming feeble and finicky, so she ended his life, disguising it as a heart attack. 2 years later, she repeated the act with Lavi. It appeared that Jenny still adhered to the belief that there's not much point in keeping old people alive, and she claimed the lives of several elderly patients. In one particular instance, a family voiced concerns to a doctor that they suspected Jenny of pilfering clothing from their deceased grandmother's residence. The doctor staunchly defended her as one of the finest women and best nurses he had ever known. It didn't even cross their minds that Toppan had actually been responsible for the elderly woman's demise. In August 1899, Jenny embarked on her customary vacation, renting a cottage on Cape Cod. On this occasion, she extended an invitation to her half-sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was elated, genuinely fond of Jenny, and had been looking forward to spending a week or two with her. Little did she know that Jenny harbored a deep-seated resentment towards her. In fact, Jane had loathed her sister throughout their lives, dating back to their childhood when Anne Toppan compelled Jane to serve Elizabeth, thereby underscoring Jane's subordinate status within the household. In a way, Elizabeth had become a symbol of the torment Jane endured during her upbringing, which ultimately led Jane to decide to end her sister's life. Given this context, it came as no surprise that a few days after Elizabeth's arrival in Cape Cod, her husband, Emil, received a telegraph message notifying him of his wife's severe illness. By the time he reached the location, Elizabeth had fallen into a coma. The attending doctor informed him that she had experienced an apoplectic stroke. Elizabeth never regained consciousness, passing away the following morning with her husband and half-sister at her bedside. If she had been able to communicate, she would have revealed how Jenny watched her suffering with a ruthless greed, her eyes reflecting 3 decades of pent-up anger and hatred. Shortly after her sister's funeral, Jenny resolved to set her long-conceived plan into motion. For some time, she had cultivated a friendship with Myra Connors, the stewardess at St. John's School in Cambridge. However, this friendship had a hidden agenda. While the work as a private nurse offered substantial pay, it proved to be quite demanding. In contrast, Myra held a stable job with a reliable income. Eventually, Myra Connors succumbed to a sudden worsening of peritonitis, occurring shortly after Jane began making frequent visits. At Myra's funeral, Jenny expressed her condolences to Myra's employer, conveying her sorrow over the untimely loss of his employee. She mentioned that Myra had planned to go on vacation and recommended Jane as her replacement. The dean, trusting her words, promptly extended the job offer to Connors. Jane skillfully played her role, even feigning reluctance before ultimately accepting the position in Myra's memory. Regrettably, in this instance, Jenny significantly overestimated her own capabilities. Her lack of financial knowledge combined with her inexperience in management led to her being asked to resign a year later. This dealt a severe blow to her ego, as she had been unwaveringly confident in her superiority. In an attempt to mend her bruised ego, Jenny returned to the place of her previous conquests, the country cottage where she had ended her sister's life. The cottage was owned by a couple named Alden Davis and Maddie, who had been renting it to Jenny regularly since 1896. Due to their fondness for Jenny, they granted her a generous discount. In the wake of the 1899 events, they felt it would be unfair to request rent for that year. In 1900, when Toppan was disgracefully discharged from her job, she asked for an extension of her rent-free stay because she was unable to cover the costs. The Davises, however, recognized that their generosity had its limits, and consequently requested payment. So, when Jane vacated the cottage without settling her debt, Maddie Davis resolved to travel to Boston and meet with her in person to arrange for payment in installments. During that period, Jenny was renting furnished rooms in the residence of Melvin and Eliza Beadle, who had thus far escaped her deadly inclinations. When Maddie arrived, Jenny offered her a glass of water, and when Maddie started feeling unwell, the Beadles willingly allowed her to rest in an unoccupied room, entrusting her care to Toppan. Jenny continued her sinister treatment, and soon Maddie slipped into a coma. When the doctor arrived, who was aware of Maddie's diabetes, Toppan informed him that the woman had consumed a piece of cake upon her arrival. The doctor, having no reason to suspect foul play and knowing Jane, placed her in charge of Maddie's treatment. Regrettably, Maddie's condition did not improve, and she endured excruciating agony before succumbing to death a week later. Following Maddie's passing, her daughters, Genevieve and Minnie, elected to stay with their father for a while. However, they committed a fateful error at their mother's funeral by inviting Jenny to be their guest. Jolly Jane wasted no time in devising an exceedingly peculiar form of entertainment, setting bonfires around the house and concocting stories of a mysterious stranger lurking in the bushes who would swiftly flee whenever she tried to approach him. In time, restlessness gripped Jenny, and the urge to take another life overwhelmed her. Her chosen victim was Genevieve, whom she described as suffering excessively from grief and in need of reuniting with her mother. This time, her approach was more cunning. She confided in her sister, Minnie, claiming that Genevieve appeared to be considering suicide, based on her inquiries about acquiring arsenic. Jane and Minnie agreed to keep a watchful eye on Genevieve, fearing she might take drastic measures. It's not difficult to surmise the grim outcome. Genevieve passed away a few days later. Throughout her murderous career, Jenny had shied away from metallic poisons, as they were too easily detectable, reserving them for cases where she was confident that investigations would not occur and the deaths could be disguised as suicides. True to form, Genevieve's official cause of death, for the sake of decorum, was documented as heart disease. 2 weeks later, Genevieve's father, Alden, succumbed to his grief. Then, driven by what seemed like an urge to complete a sinister collection, Jenny poisoned Minnie with an enema just 4 days afterward when she suddenly fell ill and weak. Perplexed doctors ultimately attributed her death to exhaustion. First suspicions. The spate of deaths within a single family over the course of a mere month drew considerable attention, prompting multiple newspapers to report on the tragic Davis family. However, none of these sources harbored suspicions of foul play. One individual, however, grew increasingly suspicious. Captain Paul Gibbs, the father-in-law of the ill-fated Minnie, whom he genuinely cared for, began contemplating the perplexing string of deaths. He confided in his concerns with a local doctor named Ira Cushing, who had encountered Alden just a day prior to his demise. Dr. Cushing concurred with Gibbs that the abrupt deaths appeared dubious. They resolved that action needed to be taken and decided to appeal to the governor of Cuba. At that time, American General Leonard Wood held the post of military governor of Cuba. He had a background in medicine and initially commenced his military career as a surgeon before transferring to the officer corps. For his valor in the Spanish-American War, Leonard had ascended to the rank of general and later assumed the role of Cuba's governor. In the summer of 1901, he was vacationing at his childhood home on Cape Cod when an old family friend, Captain Paul Gibbs, paid him a visit. Wood boasted influential connections in England and pledged to assist with the investigation. While the investigation unfolded, Jenny paid a visit to her brother-in-law, Reverend Oraimel Brigham. In swift succession, she took the life of his sister and then administered poison to him, causing illness, only to later provide a cure in an attempt to gain his favor. When Oramel rebuffed her advances, she resorted to ingesting a small amount of poison herself, hoping to land in the hospital and garner sympathy. Nevertheless, Brigham remained steadfast and did not yield to Toppan's advances. Following her discharge from the hospital, Jenny journeyed to New Hampshire to visit her old friend named Sarah Nichols. Fortunately for Sarah, experts had by then exhumed Minnie Gibbs' body and discovered traces of poison. This discovery led to Toppan's arrest, detention, and prosecution. Sarah watched in shock as her friend was escorted away by the police, oblivious to the fact that their arrival had, in all likelihood, spared her own life. For there were few individuals that Jenny relished killing more than her own friends. Initially arrested on suspicion of Minnie Gibbs' murder, it didn't take long for the media to unearth that this was just the tip of a much more sinister iceberg. The story became an explosive sensation in the press, to the point where it was suggested that if you stacked all the articles about Jolly Jane together, it would reach the height of the local Capitol building. These articles weren't limited to lists of victims and the grim particulars of the murders. They also delved into exhaustive analysis of Jenny's idiosyncrasies, ranging from her coffee consumption to her sartorial choices. There were recurrent, unverified insinuations that she had a substance addiction, though she never used illegal drugs. Curiously, for a serial killer, Jenny had no desire for such notoriety and preferred not to be the subject of media attention. Nevertheless, she had no means of influencing her newfound status as a major news sensation in 1901. Yet transitioning from newspaper headlines to proving Toppan's guilt in a court of law proved unexpectedly challenging. Despite her undeniable culpability, her defense had two strong advantages. Two significant factors complicated Toppan's prosecution. The first was the recent, natural death of the Davis family doctor, Leonard Latter. This presented an opportunity for Jenny to shift blame onto his alleged negligence or potential malevolence, as his death bore the characteristics of a suicide, offering her a potential scapegoat. The second issue lay in serious errors in the toxicology results. The initial basis for Jenny's arrest was the alleged presence of arsenic in the bodies of Minnie Gibbs and Genevieve Gordon. Even though Jenny hadn't employed arsenic in Minnie's case, it later came to light that the arsenic had actually entered her body through the embalming fluid administered by a local undertaker. Nonetheless, the prosecution persisted in asserting that both women had fallen victim to arsenic poisoning, thereby undermining their own argument in the process. Gibbs' role. In essence, there was a possibility that Toppan might have escaped prosecution. However, the intervention of the newspapers altered the course of events. They conducted interviews with Captain Paul Gibbs, the individual who had effectively cracked the cases. It was his statements that sealed Jenny's fate. When a Boston Journal reporter asked him about the presence of arsenic, Gibbs expressed his surprise and remarked, "I didn't think Jenny Toppan could have used something as easily detectable as arsenic." Captain Gibbs suspected that Jenny was far more intelligent and possessed a knowledge of pharmacology that the prosecutors were reluctant to acknowledge. When questioned about what he believed Toppan might have used, he proposed a concoction of poisons designed to neutralize each other's symptoms. He also drew attention to Jenny's motives, such as disclosing her debt to the Davis family, and the disappearance of $500 that had been in Alden's possession when he passed away. Essentially, Captain Gibbs did the groundwork for the prosecutors, leaving them red-faced when they read these interviews. Once the newspapers started revealing the story, they uncovered more and more enigmatic deaths associated with Jenny. The account of Myra Connors and numerous others came to light. The next significant breakthrough was achieved by a Boston Herald reporter who tracked down Jeanette Snow, Jane Toppan's cousin. This revelation exposed Mary Jane's father, Kelly Crack, her troubled childhood, and the tragic fates of her sisters, both of whom ended up in mental asylums. Consequently, Jenny appeared not only as a cunning poisoner seeking financial gain, but also as a woman with a troubled psyche. The prosecution's new idea. The notion of declaring Jenny insane, rather than pursuing conventional evidence and proof, increasingly captivated the prosecutors. Concurrently, her affluent clients in Boston, Those she hadn't victimized wrote letters and wielded their influence in support of her, as they simply couldn't fathom her guilt. Their efforts significantly undermined the prosecution's case. However, thanks to Captain Gibbs, there was a breakthrough in the case. Subsequent investigations confirmed that Minnie had fallen victim to a blend of poisons. Such a method pointed toward an experienced medical practitioner, sealing Jenny's fate. Originally scheduled for April 1902, Jenny's trial never occurred. Her court-appointed attorney and the district attorney, evidently influenced by the media reports, both became convinced that Toppan was afflicted with insanity. They recommended the appointment of a panel of distinguished psychiatrists to evaluate Jenny's mental state and offer their expert opinion. In March 1902, 3 individuals, Dr. Henry Stedman, Dr. George Jelly, and Dr. Hosea Quinby, initiated an examination of Jenny's psyche. Initially, Jenny eyed the doctors with suspicion, but her inherent loquaciousness eventually took over, leading her to open up to them. The psychiatrists promptly observed her pathological inclination to fabricate stories, though they were astute enough not to dwell on it. Over time, despite her initial insistence on innocence, the psychiatrists managed to coax Jenny into conversing, and she ultimately confessed to the recent murders and a multitude of others. She confessed with eerie composure, displaying a complete absence of remorse, causing the psychiatrists to shudder at the chilling nature of her revelations. Jane's nonchalant descriptions of her routine of sharing a bed with her victims and the sexual gratification she derived from observing their demise left the psychiatrists deeply shaken. They had never encountered such depravity before and were horrified. Simultaneously, she admitted to being cognizant of the illegality of her actions, although Toppan seemed unable to comprehend why her deeds were prohibited. Nonetheless, all 3 doctors unanimously declared her as morally insane, concluding that she was unfit to stand trial and had no prospects of recovery from her affliction. Trial. While there was technically no need for a subsequent trial, the state attorney general opted to hold one to prevent the establishment of a precedent where a medical decision of this nature wouldn't require jury approval. By the time the trial took place, sufficient information about Jenny's potential insanity had leaked to the press. However, this didn't deter them from dubbing her the greatest monster in American history, as America had never before prosecuted a serial killer. Nearly everyone recognized the procedural nature of the trial, including Jenny herself. She remained cheerful and engaged in conversation with her lawyer, fully aware that the jury had decided to commit her to a mental hospital for the remainder of her life. Post-trial disclosure. It was only after the trial that Jenny's attorney disclosed the astonishing truth she had confided in him when he was appointed her defense counsel 6 months earlier. The 11 deaths that the police had been investigating were merely the crowning achievement of her work. She revealed that she had commenced her killing spree 14 years ago, back in nursing school, and estimated that she had taken the lives of 31 individuals during that time. Prior to the trial, only the defense attorney and the Attorney General were privy to Jenny's confession, which was the primary reason for the appointment of the panel of experts. The psychiatrists themselves were so stunned by this revelation, primarily due to the magnitude of her victims, that they deemed her to be insane. Upon learning of this hidden revelation, the press went into a frenzy. The Boston Globe labeled her the most notorious criminal in the nation, while the Boston Post ran a front-page article hailing Jenny as the most prolific poisoner in history. They confidently predicted that she would become one of the most infamous poisoners the world has ever witnessed. A few days following the trial, the New York Journal published her chilling confession in its entirety, further magnifying Jenny's image as a monstrous figure. Life in the hospital and her passing. During her time at Taunton State Hospital, Jenny was, by all accounts, a model patient. Nonetheless, the treatment methods employed at the turn of the century made the asylum for the insane an exceedingly unpleasant place. Jenny, a patient who seemed to have complete self-control, was such a rare presence that she swiftly endeared herself to the staff. In fact, during the initial years of her hospitalization, Jenny felt relatively normal and even found some degree of comfort there. However, as is well known, few things can induce insanity more than being in a psychiatric institution. After a couple of years, she developed manic depression, leading to increasingly bizarre thoughts. She pondered the idea of reclaiming her birth name and even expressed a desire to become a nun. By 1904, she had become genuinely paranoid and refused to eat anything, ironically, out of fear of being poisoned. This development made headlines and reignited interest in the case. The articles exuded their customary smugness, characteristic of journalists reveling in the suffering of those they deemed deserving of such torment. They gleefully anticipated her demise and eagerly awaited a fitting conclusion to the tale. Yet, she did not meet her end. Jane Toppan did not breathe her last until 1938, at the age of 81, still a resident of the Taunton Mental Hospital. While her passing did spark renewed interest, it was no longer tinged with such revulsion. Her life story began to be viewed through a lens of curiosity. As often happens, time had a way of smoothing out the jagged edges of her narrative. Some even considered her compassionate and dubbed her the Angel of Death, highlighting the advanced age of her victims, with an average age of 70. Nevertheless, her name is mentioned less and less frequently today. Perhaps this is a subconscious effort to relegate the story to the recesses of memory. After all, who among us would want to dwell on the unsettling possibility that, by entrusting our lives to medical professionals, we may be unwittingly jeopardizing our well-being? If we dwelled too long on the notion that a seemingly friendly nurse could conceal the darkness of a Mary Jane, we might find ourselves hesitant to cross the threshold of a hospital. I hope you liked this story. Please don't forget to leave a comment sharing with your thoughts below. Give a thumbs up this video, and remember to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more captivating stories. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey, and we'll see you in the next video.